Hey there, storytelling enthusiasts. Before we dive into tonight's emotional journey, take a second to hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next in our channel. Now, let's begin a story about betrayal, resilience, and the power of truth. The crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow across the banquet hall as Eleanor Matthews surveyed the scene with quiet pride. After 35 years at Westridge Publishing, this retirement party represented everything she had worked for: respect, accomplishment, and most importantly, family. At 63, with silver threads weaving through her once auburn hair, she allowed herself this moment of satisfaction. "Mom, you look beautiful tonight," whispered Michael, her youngest son, squeezing her hand. At 28, he had her same gentle eyes and thoughtful demeanor. "Thank you, sweetheart," Eleanor replied, smoothing down her navy blue dress, the one she had splurged on specifically for this occasion. "I can hardly believe this day is finally here." Across the room, her daughter Cassandra held court among a group of Eleanor's colleagues. At 34, Cassandra had inherited Eleanor's determination, but none of her warmth. Her laughter rang out, practiced and precise, drawing attention as it always did. Next to her stood James, Eleanor's fiancé of 2 years, who caught Eleanor's eye and raised his champagne glass in a silent toast. "Mrs. Matthews, we're ready for your speech whenever you are," said Marcus, her former assistant, now the department head who had organized this celebration. Eleanor nodded, taking a deep breath as she made her way to the small podium. The room quieted, faces turned toward her, faces that represented decades of her life. Her heart swelled with emotion. "When I walked through the doors of Westridge as a young widow with 2 small children, I had no idea what lay ahead," she began, her voice steady despite the lump forming in her throat. "All I knew was that I had to provide for my family, and that I loved books." The crowd chuckled appreciatively. Eleanor continued, recounting milestones and memories, acknowledging those who had supported her journey from copy editor to senior publisher. Her eyes met James's, and she felt a flutter of excitement about their upcoming wedding, finally allowing herself happiness after 15 years of widowhood. "And most of all, I want to thank my children," Eleanor said, her voice breaking slightly. "Cassandra and Michael, who understood when Mommy had to work late, who grew up surrounded by manuscripts and red pens, and who have made every sacrifice worthwhile." She hadn't noticed Cassandra rising from her seat, hadn't registered the slight smirk playing at the corners of her daughter's perfectly painted lips. When Eleanor paused to take a sip of water, Cassandra stepped forward, reaching for the microphone with manicured fingers. "I think I'd like to say a few words too, if that's okay," Cassandra said, her voice honey-sweet with an undercurrent of steel. Eleanor stepped back, surprised but pleased by her daughter's initiative. "First, I want to congratulate my mother on her retirement," Cassandra began, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "It's been a long road, hasn't it? All those late nights, all those weekends at the office." A few people nodded. Eleanor felt a strange tension building in her chest. "What many of you don't know is that Michael and I have some news of our own," Cassandra continued. "We've been offered an incredible opportunity abroad, a chance to expand the family's horizons." Eleanor's smile froze. This was the first she'd heard of any opportunity. Cassandra paused, letting her gaze sweep across the room before landing on her mother. "We're moving to London next month," but without her. The silence that followed was absolute. Eleanor felt as though all oxygen had been sucked from the room. She reached for the podium to steady herself. "I know this might come as a shock to many of you," Cassandra continued, her voice dropping to a confessional tone. "But there are things about my mother that you don't know, things we've kept private out of respect." From her designer handbag, Cassandra withdrew a folder and began distributing papers to the closest tables. "Bank statements showing mysterious withdrawals from our family trust. Emails to my father's old business partners that undercut his legacy. And most recently, manipulative messages trying to sabotage my career opportunities overseas." Eleanor stared in horror as her colleagues began examining the documents, their expressions shifting from confusion to discomfort to judgment. "Cassandra, what are you doing?" she whispered, but her daughter ignored her. "For years, we've protected her," Cassandra declared, her voice carrying throughout the stunned room. "But now that she's retiring, we need to move forward with our lives, without the burden of her instabilities." Eleanor could hear the whispers beginning, could see decades of professional relationships crumbling before her eyes. "These are lies," she said, her voice barely audible. "I would never—" "Mom, please don't make a scene," Cassandra interrupted smoothly. "We've arranged for a lovely assisted living facility. It's really for the best." Eleanor turned desperately toward James, seeking support, explanation, anything. But her fiancé was already standing, his face ashen. Without meeting her eyes, he placed his champagne glass on the table, removed the engagement ring from his pocket, the ring he'd been carrying to surprise her with a renewal of vows tonight, and placed it beside the glass. Without a word, he walked out, the sound of the closing door echoing like a gunshot through the silent room. Eleanor Matthews, who had built a life from nothing, who had raised 2 children alone while climbing the corporate ladder, who had finally allowed herself to love again, stood abandoned before a room of averted eyes and whispered judgments. The perfect night, the culmination of a life well lived, had in minutes transformed into a nightmare from which there would be no waking. 3 months after what Eleanor had come to think of simply as the incident, she sat alone in her garden, watching autumn leaves spiral down from the maple tree she'd planted when they'd first moved into this house. The garden had become her sanctuary, the only place where she felt anything resembling peace. Her phone lay silent beside her, as it had for weeks now. The initial flurry of concerned messages from a few loyal colleagues had dwindled to nothing. No one wanted to be associated with someone like her, someone who had supposedly deceived everyone for years. "Mrs. Matthews," a voice called from the front gate. "It's Diana from next door. I brought you some of that butternut squash soup you liked last time." Eleanor sighed, gathering her cardigan around her shoulders before making her way to the gate. Diana Peterson, a retired elementary school teacher, was one of the few people who still acknowledged Eleanor's existence. "You didn't have to do that," Eleanor said, attempting a smile as she accepted the container. "Nonsense," Diana replied, her kind eyes studying Eleanor's face. "You've lost weight again, haven't you?" Eleanor shrugged. "I haven't had much appetite lately." "Any word from the children?" Diana asked gently. "Michael texts occasionally," Eleanor said, her voice carefully neutral. "He's settling into London. The publishing house there has given him a junior editor position." What she didn't say was that each message felt like a coded apology. "The weather here is dreary, Mom, but the work is interesting. Hope you're taking care of yourself." No mention of Cassandra, no explanation for the public execution of her reputation. Just vague pleasantries that did nothing to fill the gaping wound of betrayal. "And your fiancé?" Diana ventured. Eleanor's fingers tightened around the soup container. "James has moved on, I believe. Someone at the grocery store mentioned seeing him with someone new." The words tasted bitter in her mouth. James hadn't even given her the courtesy of an explanation. One moment they were planning a future together, the next he was a stranger who couldn't bear to look at her. "Their loss," Diana said firmly. "I've known you for 15 years, Eleanor. I know what kind of person you are." Eleanor felt tears threatening and blinked them away. "Thank you," she whispered. "Would you like to come in for tea?" It was a small gesture, inviting someone into her home, but it felt monumental after months of self-imposed isolation. Diana's smile was worth the effort. Inside, Eleanor moved mechanically through the ritual of making tea, grateful for the distraction of measuring leaves and heating water. The house felt too large now, filled with echoes of a family that had abandoned her. She'd considered selling it, but stubbornness kept her rooted. This was her home. She wouldn't let Cassandra's lies take that from her too. I saw an interesting posting at the community center, Diana mentioned casually as Eleanor set the teacups down. They're looking for someone to run a creative writing workshop for seniors. Twice a week, very informal. Eleanor gave her neighbor a knowing look. Diana, just something to consider, Diana said innocently. You were always talking about wanting to teach after retirement. That had been the plan, before everything fell apart, before Eleanor became the woman people whispered about at the supermarket. I don't think I'd be very welcome, Eleanor said softly. News travels fast in this town. Some people gossip, Diana acknowledged. Others form their own opinions. You can't hide forever, Eleanor. But hiding felt safe. Aiding meant not seeing the doubt in people's eyes, not having to defend herself against accusations so absurd she couldn't believe anyone had taken them seriously. How could anyone believe she would sabotage her own daughter or steal from the family trust she herself had established? Later that evening, after Diana had left, Eleanor found herself standing before the closet in her home office. With trembling hands, she unlocked the door and pulled out the box she'd stored there, the evidence of Cassandra's deception. Bank statements showing Cassandra's own withdrawals from the trust, emails she'd sent to colleagues undermining Eleanor's position, the carefully constructed paper trail that had allowed her daughter to paint her as unstable and manipulative. Eleanor had discovered these documents too late, after most people had already made up their minds. After James had already walked away, after her professional reputation had been shredded beyond repair. She traced her finger over a photograph of Cassandra's graduation, her daughter beaming with the world at her feet. When had things gone so wrong? When had her ambitious, driven daughter decided that Eleanor was an obstacle rather than a foundation? Her phone chimed, startling her from her thoughts. A text from Michael. Don't forget to take your blood pressure medication, Mom. Stay well. Eleanor stared at the message, reading between the lines for any hint of remorse, any suggestion that he might be planning to reveal the truth. But there was nothing. Just another vague pleasantry from a son who had stood by silently while his sister destroyed their mother's life. With a heavy sigh, Eleanor returned the box to its hiding place. What good was evidence when no one was willing to see it? What purpose would it serve to fight back now when the damage was already done? Outside, the autumn wind swept more leaves from the maple tree, carrying them away from their branches into the gathering darkness. Eleanor watched them go, feeling a kinship with their untethered flight, wondering how long it would take before she, too, touched ground again. 6 months after the incident, Eleanor Matthews stood before the mirror in her bathroom, scissors in hand. Her silver-streaked hair hung past her shoulders, the same style she'd worn for decades, the style James had loved. With methodical precision, she began to cut, watching the strands fall into the sink. New beginnings, she whispered to her reflection. The woman who stared back at her was thinner, with more prominent cheekbones and deeper lines around her eyes, but there was something else there too, a hardness that hadn't existed before, a resilience born of necessity. The previous week, she had finally accepted Diana's persistent suggestion and visited the community center. The director, a no-nonsense woman named Valerie, had recognized her name, but made no mention of scandals or rumors. We need someone with publishing experience, Valerie had said matter-of-factly. These seniors have stories to tell, and most have never had anyone listen. Can you start next Tuesday? Now, with her newly cropped hair and a simple black blazer, Eleanor prepared for her first workshop. The nervousness she felt was almost pleasant, a reminder that she was still capable of feeling something beyond grief and betrayal. The community center was bustling when she arrived, the room allocated for her workshop already half filled with elderly participants clutching notebooks and pens. Eleanor took a deep breath and stepped inside. Good morning, she said, her publisher's voice returning naturally. I'm Eleanor Matthews, and I'm here to help you tell your stories. For 2 hours, Eleanor listened as men and women in their 70s and 80s shared fragments of lives long lived. War memories, lost loves, career triumphs, family secrets. Their words flowed awkwardly at first, then with increasing confidence as Eleanor gently guided them with techniques she'd used with countless authors over the years. "You have a gift," remarked Alberto, a retired factory worker with gnarled hands and sharp eyes. "You really hear what we're trying to say, even when we can't find the right words." "That was my job for 35 years, Eleanor replied with a small smile, finding the story beneath the words. As the weeks passed, Eleanor's Tuesday and Thursday workshops became the anchors of her week. She developed a routine, mornings in her garden, afternoons preparing for classes or editing her students' work, evenings alone with books that had once been her professional focus and now became her companions. Occasionally, she received postcards from London, always from Michael, never from Cassandra. The most recent one had been different, containing a single cryptic line beneath the picture of Tower Bridge. Some stories take time to reveal their true plot. Eleanor had studied those words for hours, uncertain whether to nurture the spark of hope they ignited. Was Michael trying to tell her something? Or was she simply desperate to find meaning where none existed? 3 months into her new role at the community center, Valerie approached her after a particularly successful workshop. "The Regional Literary Festival is looking for panel moderators," she said without preamble. "I submitted your name." Eleanor froze. "The Literary Festival, but that's a big deal, yes," Valerie interrupted. "And you're qualified. Your professional reputation in publishing still means something, Eleanor, regardless of personal matters. The festival would mean stepping fully back into the literary world she'd once dominated, facing former colleagues, possibly even authors she'd published. It would mean making herself visible again, vulnerable to whispers and stares. "I'm not sure I'm ready," Eleanor admitted. Valerie's expression softened slightly. "None of us are ever ready to face our fears, but sometimes we do it anyway." That evening, Eleanor found herself once again opening the box of evidence she'd collected. The documents told a clear story, one of calculated betrayal by a daughter determined to eliminate any obstacle to her ambitions. Eleanor had spent months trying to understand Cassandra's motives, searching her memory for signs she might have missed, moments when she could have changed the course of events. Had she been too demanding, too successful, too focused on work during Cassandra's formative years? Or was there something broken in their relationship that had always been there, waiting for the right moment to shatter completely? Next to the evidence lay a half-finished letter to Michael, one of dozens Eleanor had written but never sent. How could she ask her son to choose between his mother and his sister? How could she place that burden on him when he'd finally established himself professionally? With sudden determination, Eleanor reached for her phone and typed a message to Valerie. "I'll moderate the panel. Send me the details." As she pressed send, a strange calm settled over her. For too long, she had allowed Cassandra's actions to define her existence, had permitted shame to keep her hidden away. Perhaps it was time to write a new chapter, not as a victim of betrayal, but as a woman reclaiming her narrative word by word, day by day. She glanced at the most recent postcard from Michael, the cryptic message seemingly more significant now. Some stories take time to reveal their true plot. Perhaps her own story wasn't finished after all. Perhaps the most important chapters were yet to be written. Outside, spring had arrived almost imperceptibly. The maple tree that had stood bare through winter now showed the first tender buds of new growth. Eleanor watched them from her window, sensing a parallel awakening within herself. Fragile, tentative, but undeniably alive. The literary festival marquee hummed with conversation as Eleanor adjusted her microphone, glancing down at her notes one final time. 9 months had passed since the incident, and today marked her first major public appearance in the literary world that had once been her domain. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our moderator for this afternoon's discussion on truth in memoir, the former senior publisher at Westridge Publishing, Eleanor Matthews. The applause was polite, if not enthusiastic. Eleanor rose from her chair, smoothing down her emerald green blazer. A deliberate choice, a color of growth and renewal, rather than the safe neutrals she'd hidden behind for months. "Thank you," she began, her voice steady despite the flutter of anxiety in her chest. Truth is perhaps the most elusive element in literature, even, or especially, when authors claim to be telling their own stories. For the next hour, Eleanor guided the discussion with the skill of her decades in publishing, drawing out the panelists, challenging assumptions, and weaving connections between their diverse perspectives. Gradually, she felt the audience's energy shift from cautious observation to genuine engagement. When the session ended, several attendees approached with questions and comments. Eleanor answered each one professionally, ignoring the occasional whispered asides from those who recognized her name and remembered the rumors. "That was masterfully done," said a voice behind her as the crowd thinned. Eleanor turned to find Harriet Winters, the editor-in-chief of Paramount Publishing, Westridge's primary competitor and a woman Eleanor had known for 20 years. "Harriet," Eleanor acknowledged with a nod. "Thank you for coming." "Walk with me," Harriet suggested, gesturing toward the festival grounds. They strolled in silence for a moment, passing colorful book displays and food vendors. Eleanor waited, knowing Harriet well enough to recognize when she had something significant to say. "I never believed it, you know," Harriet finally stated, her tone matter-of-fact. "The stories about you, they didn't align with the Eleanor Matthews I've known for 2 decades. Eleanor's step faltered briefly. "You didn't?" "Of course not. Anyone with half a brain could see it was character assassination." Harriet paused beside a bench overlooking the river and sat down, patting the space beside her. "What I couldn't figure out was why you didn't fight back." Eleanor sank onto the bench, suddenly aware of how exhausting the afternoon had been. "What would have been the point? My own daughter orchestrated it. My fiancé believed it without question. If the people closest to me accepted these lies so readily, why would anyone else believe the truth?" Harriet's shrewd eyes studied Eleanor's face. "And your son, Michael, isn't it? The quiet one who always came to the publishing events." "Michael is complicated," Eleanor sighed. "He's in London with Cassandra. He sends postcards, nothing substantial." "Interesting," Harriet murmured. "Because I met him last month at the London Book Fair. He was asking very specific questions about document authentication and digital forensics." Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. "What?" "Oh yes," Harriet continued casually. "Very interested in how one might prove that certain emails had been fabricated or signatures forged. Purely professional interest," he claimed. A memory surfaced. Michael at 14, witnessing Cassandra manipulate their father's will reading, watching silently as she convinced the executor to grant her access to funds meant for her college education. He had said nothing then, but later he'd placed a folder of copied documents on Eleanor's desk without comment, his way of ensuring she knew the truth, even if he wouldn't confront his sister directly. "You think he's building a case?" Eleanor whispered, hardly daring to hope. "I think your son is more strategic than you give him credit for," Harriet replied, "and I think he inherited his mother's patience." As they parted ways, Harriet pressed a business card into Eleanor's hand. "Paramount is launching a new imprint focused on late-career writers. We need someone with experience nurturing new voices, someone like you." Eleanor stared at the card, emotions warring within her, hope, fear, possibility. "I'll think about it," she promised. That evening, as Eleanor unlocked her front door, she noticed a small package on her doorstep. No postmark, no return address, just her name in familiar handwriting. Michael's. With trembling fingers, she carried it inside and carefully opened it. Inside lay a USB drive and a brief note. "The truth takes time, but it always surfaces. I'm sorry it's taken this long. Check your email tomorrow at noon. Love, Michael Eleanor plugged the drive into her computer, her breath catching as files appeared on the screen. Dozens of them, meticulously organized. Emails between Cassandra and James showing their collusion months before the retirement party. Bank records revealing Cassandra's systematic draining of family accounts. Voice recordings of Cassandra admitting to document fabrication. Most damning of all was a video, Cassandra speaking candidly to someone off camera, laughing about how easily she had manipulated the situation. "Mother always taught us that perception is reality." Her daughter's voice rang clearly through the speakers. "I just created a new perception. No one questions a devoted daughter's concern, especially when there's a convenient scapegoat with everything to lose." Eleanor watched the video 3 times, each viewing revealing new layers of her daughter's calculated betrayal. There was no emotion in Cassandra's voice, no anger, no resentment, just cool pragmatism as she discussed destroying her mother's life as though it were a business transaction. For hours, Eleanor sifted through the evidence, pieces falling into place. Michael had been gathering this information for months, working silently and methodically, while maintaining his cover as the loyal brother who had followed his sister to London. As dawn broke, Eleanor made herself a cup of tea and stood in her garden, watching the first light illuminate the maple tree, now lush with summer foliage. For the first time in nearly a year, she felt something unfamiliar stirring within her, not just hope, but certainty. The weight of truth was finally shifting from her shoulders. Her phone chimed with a text message from an unknown number. Family reunion being planned. Next month. Everyone will be there. Time to come home, Mom. Michael Eleanor closed her eyes, feeling the morning sun warm on her face. Whatever came next would require courage, but for the first time since that devastating night, she was ready to face it. Not as a victim seeking vindication, but as a woman reclaiming her truth. The hotel ballroom, where the family reunion was being held, gleamed with tasteful decorations and subdued lighting. Eleanor paused at the entrance, one hand clutching her small purse containing a copy of the USB drive, her talisman, her proof, her armor. In the month since receiving Michael's package, they had communicated through encrypted messages, planning each detail meticulously. Eleanor had accepted Harriet's job offer at Paramount Publishing, her first step back into the professional world. The announcement had created ripples in literary circles, with former colleagues reaching out tentatively, testing the waters of reconciliation. "Mom!" Michael's voice broke through her thoughts as he approached, embracing her tightly. Up close, she could see the strain of the past year etched on his face, the double life he'd been leading taking its toll. "You look tired," she murmured, touching his cheek. "Worth it," he replied simply. "Everyone's inside. Cassandra doesn't know you're coming." Eleanor nodded, drawing a deep breath. "And James?" "Front table with his new girlfriend. He looks miserable, if that helps." Michael's attempt at humor fell flat, but Eleanor appreciated the effort. "It doesn't," she said honestly. "But thank you anyway." They entered together, conversations faltering as heads turned toward them. Eleanor held her chin high, acknowledging the stares with calm dignity. She had dressed carefully for this moment, a deep burgundy dress that spoke of confidence rather than contrition, her silver-cropped hair styled precisely, pearl earrings her late husband had given her, providing a subtle connection to her past. Across the room, Cassandra stood mid-conversation, her champagne glass freezing halfway to her lips as she spotted her mother. Even from a distance, Eleanor could see the calculation beginning behind her daughter's eyes, assessing threats, formulating responses, planning diversions. "Eleanor?" A hesitant voice spoke beside her. James, looking older somehow, his confident posture diminished. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Evidently not," Eleanor replied evenly, "though I believe family reunions typically include all family members." Before James could respond, Michael stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, please." The room quieted, all eyes turning toward them. Michael guided Eleanor to the small stage at the front of the ballroom, his hand steady at her elbow. Many of you were present at another gathering last year, Michael began, his voice clear and unwavering. A retirement party that turned into something else entirely. Today, we're here to correct the record. Eleanor watched Cassandra moving swiftly toward the stage, her expression a mask of concern. "Michael, what are you doing?" she hissed, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Mom isn't well. You know that. This isn't the time." "Actually, Cassandra," Michael interrupted smoothly, "it's exactly the time." He withdrew a tablet from his jacket pocket and connected it to the room's projection system. "For nearly a year, I've been collecting evidence. Evidence that tells a very different story about what happened that night and why." The first document appeared on the screen, an email from Cassandra to James dated 3 months before the retirement party, outlining their plan to discredit Eleanor and gain control of her assets. "Michael, this is ridiculous," Cassandra laughed, though Eleanor could hear the strain beneath her daughter's practiced poise. "These are obviously fake." "That's what I thought you might say," Michael replied calmly. "Which is why I had them authenticated by 3 independent digital forensics experts." He nodded to a man at the back of the room who stepped forward, a distinguished-looking professional Eleanor didn't recognize. "Dr. Philip Harmon, digital forensics consultant," Michael introduced him. "Would you please explain your findings to our guests?" For the next 20 minutes, Dr. Harmon methodically presented the evidence, his clinical detachment lending credibility to each damning revelation. Bank records showing Cassandra's systematic theft, doctored documents presented at the retirement party now revealed as forgeries, voice recordings of Cassandra admitting her deception to confidants. The room grew increasingly silent as the presentation continued. Eleanor kept her eyes on her daughter, watching as Cassandra's composure began to fracture. Subtle at first, then more obvious as denial became impossible. When the final piece of evidence appeared, the video of Cassandra laughing about her manipulation, a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. On screen, Cassandra's voice echoed throughout the ballroom. "Mother always taught us that perception is reality. I just created a new perception." As the video ended, Michael turned to Eleanor. "Mom, would you like to say something?" Eleanor rose slowly, approaching the microphone with measured steps. The room waited in tense silence. "For almost a year, I've asked myself what I did to deserve this," she began, her voice soft but steady. "What failing as a mother could have led my daughter to orchestrate such a betrayal? I've examined every memory, every decision, searching for the moment where I lost her." She paused, looking directly at Cassandra, whose face had drained of color. "But I've realized there's no answer to that question. Sometimes people make choices that have nothing to do with how they were raised or loved. Sometimes ambition and entitlement overshadow decency and truth." Eleanor turned to address the room at large. "I don't stand before you seeking revenge or even justice. I'm here because the truth matters, not just for me, but for all of us. We cannot allow lies to define our reality, no matter how convincing they might seem." A movement caught her eye. James, rising from his seat, his expression stricken. "Eleanor, he began, but she raised a hand to stop him. "No, James. You made your choice when it mattered. There's nothing left to say." Cassandra finally broke her silence, her voice shaking with rage. "This proves nothing. Michael has always been jealous of my success. He's manipulated all of you, can't you see that?" But her words fell flat, meeting only uncomfortable glances and averted eyes. The tide had turned, perception shifting as irrefutably as the evidence presented before them. As the evening unraveled, Eleanor found herself surrounded by former friends and colleagues offering apologies and support. She accepted them graciously, but without particular emotion, understanding now that relationships fractured by doubt could never truly be restored to their former strength. Across the room, Cassandra stood alone, her carefully constructed world disintegrating around her. For a brief moment their eyes met, mother and daughter, connected by blood but separated by choices that could never be undone. In that glance, Eleanor saw something she hadn't expected. Not remorse or shame, but a flicker of respect, as one strategist acknowledging another's superior play. It wasn't forgiveness, and it wasn't reconciliation. But as Eleanor turned away, she felt the weight of the past year finally beginning to lift. Not because she had won, but because the truth had. 1 year after the family reunion, Eleanor stood in the garden of her new home, clipping roses for the dining table. The cottage, nestled on the outskirts of the city, was smaller than her previous house, but infinitely more peaceful. A place of her own choosing, rather than a repository of painful memories. "These look beautiful," remarked Diana, who had come to help prepare for the evening's dinner party. "The whole garden is thriving." "Amazing what can grow when given the right conditions," Eleanor replied, gathering the fragrant blooms in her basket. The past year had brought changes Eleanor could never have anticipated. After the truth had been revealed, several of Cassandra's professional connections had severed ties, her carefully cultivated image tarnished by evidence of her manipulation and dishonesty. She had remained in London, refusing all contact and denying any wrongdoing, despite the incontrovertible proof. James had made numerous attempts to reconcile, sending letters and messages that Eleanor had read but never answered. Some wounds, she had discovered, were better left to heal without reopening. Michael had returned to the States, accepting a position at Paramount Publishing, where Eleanor now headed the new imprint for senior writers. Their relationship had deepened through shared trauma and recovery, evolving into a friendship between equals rather than simply mother and son. "Is Michael bringing anyone tonight?" Diana asked as they arranged the roses in a crystal vase. "Just himself," Eleanor replied, "though he mentioned meeting someone interesting at the bookstore last week. An architectural historian, I believe." The dinner party was a small celebration, 1 year since Eleanor had reclaimed her narrative. The guest list included those who had stood by her during the darkest times. Diana, who had never doubted, Harriet, who had offered professional redemption, Valerie from the community center, and 3 of Eleanor's senior writers, whose memoirs were now in various stages of publication. As evening approached, Eleanor put the finishing touches on the table setting, pleased with the intimate atmosphere she had created. At 64, she had discovered a new rhythm to her life. Part-time publishing work that allowed her to mentor emerging voices, community workshops that kept her connected to real people with real stories, and quiet evenings alone that no longer felt lonely, but restorative. The doorbell chimed, announcing the first guests. Eleanor smoothed her hands over her sage green dress and went to welcome them. The evening unfolded exactly as she had hoped. Good food, better conversation, and the comfortable ease of people who had chosen to be in each other's lives rather than bound by obligation or circumstance. As coffee was served, Michael raised his glass. "To my mother," he said simply, "who taught me that the true measure of strength isn't in never falling, but in rising every time we fall." Glasses clinked as Eleanor accepted their toast with a grateful smile. Later, as the party wound down and guests began to depart, Michael lingered behind, helping with the cleanup. "I got another email from Cassandra yesterday," he mentioned casually as he dried a wine glass. "She's struggling in London. The publishing house is letting her go." Eleanor continued rinsing dishes, absorbing this information. "And how does that make you feel?" she asked, carefully keeping judgment from her voice. Michael considered the question. "Complicated," he admitted. "Part of me thinks it's justice. Another part remembers the sister who taught me to ride a bike and helped me with my college applications." Eleanor nodded, understanding perfectly the complexity of loving someone who had caused such harm. "People are rarely all good or all bad," she said softly. "Even Cassandra." "She asked about you," Michael added. "Whether you're happy now." Eleanor dried her hands and leaned against the counter, thinking about how to answer. Was she happy? The word seemed too simple for the rich tapestry of emotions that comprised her life now. "I'm at peace," she said finally, which is something different, I think. More valuable, perhaps. After Michael left, Eleanor took her tea to the porch swing overlooking her garden. The night was clear, stars visible above the trees she had planted when she first moved in, trees that would take years to reach their full height, but whose growth was already evident to the watchful eye. Her phone chimed with a message notification. Expecting it to be a thank you from one of her dinner guests, she was startled to see Cassandra's name on the screen. The first direct communication from her daughter in 2 years. The message was brief. I'm coming home next month, not asking for forgiveness, just closure. Will you see me? Eleanor stared at the screen, emotions washing through her like waves, anger, grief, caution, and beneath it all, the persistent pull of maternal love that had never fully extinguished despite everything. She thought about what closure might mean. For Cassandra, for herself, for the wounded relationship between them. There would be no returning to what was before. Too much had been broken. Too many words could never be unsaid. Yet Eleanor had learned that moving forward didn't always require forgiveness. Sometimes it simply required acknowledgement of the truth. After several minutes of contemplation, she typed a response. Yes, not at my home. The botanical gardens near the Japanese maples. Let me know when. Setting her phone aside, Eleanor gazed up at the stars, thinking about the strange circularity of life, how endings often contained the seeds of new beginnings, how truth, once revealed, could never be hidden again. The following morning, Eleanor sat at her desk, reviewing manuscript pages from one of her writers, a 90-year-old former teacher whose memoir of rural education in the 1950s had revealed a compelling voice, long silenced by circumstance. The work gave Eleanor profound satisfaction, helping others shape their truths into narratives that might outlive them. A knock at her office door interrupted her concentration. Harriet entered, looking unusually solemn. "Have you heard from James lately?" she asked without preamble. Eleanor shook her head. "Not for several months." "Why?" "He's been trying to reach you. His sister called me when she couldn't get through to you directly." Harriet hesitated. "He's ill, Eleanor. Pancreatic cancer, advanced stage." The news hit with unexpected force. Despite everything, despite the betrayal and abandonment, James had been the man she'd once planned to spend her life with. The man who had walked away without a word when faced with Cassandra's manipulations. "What does he want?" Eleanor asked, her voice carefully controlled. "To see you, apparently. To explain." Harriet shrugged. "It's entirely your choice whether to grant him that, of course." That evening, Eleanor found herself driving to the hospital across town, uncertain what had compelled her to come. Closure, perhaps, that elusive concept Cassandra had mentioned in her message. Or maybe simple human compassion for someone facing their final days. James looked diminished in the hospital bed, his once robust frame now frail beneath the thin blanket. When he saw Eleanor in the doorway, his eyes widened with surprise and unmistakable joy. "You came," he whispered, his voice raspy. "I didn't think you would." "Neither did I," Eleanor admitted, taking a seat beside the bed. She didn't reach for his hand, maintaining the emotional distance she needed to protect herself. "I've practiced what to say to you 1,000 times, James said, each word clearly an effort. "Apologies seem inadequate. Explanations sound like excuses." "Why did you believe her so easily?" Eleanor asked, the question that had haunted her for 2 years finally spoken aloud. "After everything we'd shared, how could you walk away without even asking for my side?" James closed his eyes briefly. "I've asked myself the same question every day since the truth came out." He paused, gathering strength. Cassandra had been planting seeds of doubt for months before that night. Small comments about your behavior, suggestions that you were becoming unstable. When she presented those documents, it seemed to confirm what I'd already been conditioned to suspect. "You could have asked me," Eleanor said quietly. "You should have known me better than that." "I should have," he agreed. "My greatest regret isn't just that I believed her lies, but that I wasn't brave enough to face you afterward. By the time Michael revealed the truth, I'd convinced myself you could never forgive me, and perhaps I was right about that." Eleanor sat in silence, absorbing his words. There was truth in them, and a certain pathetic irony. He had been another victim of Cassandra's manipulation, albeit one who had chosen the easier path of believing the worst, rather than standing firm in faith. "I didn't come here to offer forgiveness," Eleanor said finally. "But I didn't come to increase your suffering either. Whatever happened between us is past now. We've both built different lives." "You seem well," James observed, studying her face. "At peace." "I am," Eleanor confirmed, finding truth in the statement. "It wasn't an easy journey, but I'm grateful for where it's led me." They talked for a while longer, not about what might have been, but about what was. Eleanor told him about her new imprint, her writers, her garden. James spoke of his regrets and his hopes that his children from his first marriage would remember him kindly. Neither mentioned Cassandra directly, though her shadow lingered in the spaces between their words. As Eleanor prepared to leave, James reached for her hand. "I was a coward," he said simply. "You deserved better." "Yes," Eleanor agreed, allowing the brief contact. "I did, and now I have it." The weeks passed quickly as Eleanor prepared for Cassandra's return. She threw herself into work, finalizing publication details for her first 3 memoirs and beginning the selection process for the next cycle of writers. In the evenings, she tended her garden or met with friends, the circle of relationships she had carefully cultivated in her new life. When the day of the meeting arrived, Eleanor chose her outfit with deliberate care. A cornflower blue dress that had no associations with her previous life, neither the retirement party nor any family event Cassandra might remember. Her only jewelry was a simple silver pendant Michael had given her for her birthday, a tangible reminder of the loyalty and love that had sustained her. The botanical gardens were peaceful on the weekday morning, few visitors disturbing the tranquility of the winding paths and carefully tended displays. Eleanor found a bench near the Japanese maple collection, its leaves just beginning to show hints of the brilliant red they would become in autumn. She sat with her back straight, hands folded in her lap, and waited. Cassandra arrived precisely on time, her appearance both familiar and strange. The same confident walk and elegant posture, but with new lines of strain around her eyes and mouth. She had cut her hair short, adopting a style not dissimilar to Eleanor's own. The observation brought an unexpected flicker of amusement. "Mother," Cassandra said, the word neither warm nor cold as she sat on the opposite end of the bench. "Cassandra," Eleanor acknowledged, "you're looking well." The pleasantry felt absurd given their history, but some social conventions persisted, even in the most extreme circumstances. "London didn't work out," Cassandra stated flatly. "The publishing house let me go after the scandal became too well known to ignore." Eleanor nodded, unsurprised. The literary world, for all its public drama, was ultimately a small community with a long memory. "What will you do now?" she asked, genuine curiosity in her question. Cassandra shrugged, a gesture Eleanor had never seen from her typically decisive daughter. "Start over somewhere, maybe Chicago or Seattle, somewhere far enough away that my reputation won't precede me." They sat in silence for a moment, watching a hummingbird dart among nearby flowers, its wings a blur of constant motion. "Why did you do it?" Eleanor finally asked, the question she had carried for 2 years. "What did I do to make you hate me so much?" Cassandra's expression hardened. "I didn't hate you. It wasn't personal." "Not personal?" Eleanor echoed incredulously. "You destroyed my reputation, alienated my friends, drove away the man I loved, and tried to have me committed. How was that not personal?" "It was business," Cassandra replied, her voice cool. "You were in my way professionally. Your contacts, your influence, they were assets I needed. Taking them from you was the most efficient path forward." The callousness of the statement stunned Eleanor into momentary silence. She had imagined many possible explanations: childhood resentments, perceived favoritism toward Michael, even some hidden trauma she had failed to recognize, but this cold calculation was somehow worse than any emotional motivation. "You were my daughter," Eleanor said quietly. I would have given you anything you needed. All you had to do was ask." For the first time, something flickered in Cassandra's expression. Not remorse exactly, but perhaps recognition of an opportunity missed. "That's not how I operate," she said after a moment. "Taking is more reliable than being given. Less chance of strings attached." Eleanor studied her daughter's face, seeing beyond the practiced composure to the profound emptiness beneath. For all her intelligence and ambition, Cassandra had never understood the most fundamental aspect of human connection. That true strength came from bonds freely given and received, not from manipulation and control. "I'm sorry for you," Eleanor said, the words emerging with surprising gentleness. "It must be exhausting to see the world that way." Cassandra's eyes narrowed slightly. "I didn't come for your pity." "No," Eleanor agreed. "You came for closure." "But I'm not sure I can give you that, Cassandra. Closure implies an ending, and some things don't end so much as transform. What happened between us has changed us both permanently." "So that's it?" Cassandra asked, a hint of her old sharpness returning. "No forgiveness, no reconciliation." Eleanor considered the question carefully. "Forgiveness isn't something I can just hand to you like a gift. It's a process, and I'm still in the middle of it. As for reconciliation," she shook her head slightly, "I don't think that's possible, at least not in the way you might imagine." "Then what was the point of meeting?" Cassandra demanded. "To see you," Eleanor said simply, "to speak directly, rather than through the filter of memory or Michael's reports, to remind myself that you're a human being who made terrible choices, not a monster I created." Cassandra seemed to deflate slightly, as if Eleanor's measured response had denied her the dramatic confrontation she'd been prepared for. "Michael won't speak to me," she said after a moment, an unexpected vulnerability in her voice. "That's between you and him," Eleanor replied. "I won't intervene either way." They sat in silence again, longer this time. Eleanor felt a strange sense of peace settling over her. She had feared this meeting, dreaded the emotions it might stir up, but sitting here now, she realized that Cassandra no longer held power over her feelings or her future. "I'm building a good life," Eleanor said finally. "Different from what I had planned, but perhaps better in some ways. Whatever happens next, whether you find your own path to redemption or continue as you have been, that life will continue." Cassandra stood abruptly. "Always the wise mother, even now," she said, a complex mixture of emotions in her voice. "Goodbye, Eleanor." The use of her first name rather than mother was deliberate, Eleanor knew. One final attempt to sever the bond between them. But as she watched Cassandra walk away, her posture straight but her steps less confident than before, Eleanor understood that some bonds couldn't be broken by words or actions, only transformed into something different. 3 months later, as autumn painted the world in rich golds and reds, Eleanor hosted a launch party for her imprint's first 3 memoirs. The event was held at a small, elegant bookstore that had supported her vision from the beginning. Writers, editors, and readers mingled among the shelves, celebrating the publication of voices that might otherwise have remained unheard. Michael arrived late, slipping in through the back entrance and making his way to Eleanor's side. "Sorry," he whispered. "Meeting ran over." "You're here now," Eleanor replied, squeezing his arm affectionately. She noticed a new lightness in his expression, the burden of the past 2 years finally beginning to lift from his shoulders as well. As the evening wound down, Harriet raised a glass. "To Eleanor Matthews and Paramount Legacy Press, proving that the most powerful stories often come from those with the longest view." Applause filled the room, warm and genuine. Eleanor looked around at the faces surrounding her, some new friends, some old colleagues, all people who had chosen to be part of her reconstructed life. The path that had led her here had been painful beyond imagining, but standing in this moment, she couldn't wish it undone. Later, as she and Michael walked to their cars, he handed her a small package. "This came to my apartment yesterday," he explained. from Cassandra. Eleanor unwrapped it carefully to find a first edition of her favorite novel, the book that had inspired her to enter publishing 4 decades earlier. Inside was a brief note in Cassandra's precise handwriting. Some stories don't have happy endings, but they can still be worth telling. What will you do with it? Michael asked quietly. Eleanor traced her finger over the embossed cover, feeling the weight of everything it represented, the good and the bad, the love and the betrayal, the endings and beginnings that had shaped her journey. Keep it, she said simply. It's part of my story too. As she drove home alone, Eleanor thought about the nature of truth, how it could hurt and heal in equal measure, how it could destroy and rebuild, how it could set you adrift and then anchor you more firmly than before. The retirement party that had once seemed like the ending of her story had proven to be merely the beginning of a different chapter, one written in her own hand, on her own terms. The weight of truth had nearly broken her, but in the end, it had been the very thing that set her free. Hey there! If you enjoyed this emotional journey through Eleanor's story of betrayal and redemption, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, hit that like button, and leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories like this one directly to you. Thank you for listening.